and welcome to this review of the Novelkeys Cream switch. I requested a batch to be sent to me for review as I found them quite intriguing, and Mike obliged, so these are a commercial donation, although of course I'll be giving them an unbiased review as always. I use this iGK61 hot swappable keyboard as a test bed. I've reviewed this keyboard previously, so I won't talk about it in this video. If you're interested, go and check out the first video I did with it, in which I tested box Royal switches in it, also from Novelkeys as it happens. Link in the description below. So what are these cream switches and why are they special? Well, they're linear switches with an MX style housing rather than the box housing that Novelkeys are arguably more well known for, and there's a few special traits, but the biggest thing by far is that the housing is entirely made out of polyoxymethylene, or POM, which is a polymer of formaldehyde characterized by high strength, hardness and rigidity. In our case, however, its most interesting property is probably that it has a very low coefficient of friction compared to many other plastics. It's often used in things like mechanical gears and sliding parts, so it seems like a natural fit to make switches out of it. Compared to nylon, which is what cherry housings and Alps sliders are made out of, it's noticeably lower, and especially ABS and polycarbonate, which Alps and Matthias housings are made out of, respectively, it's a lot lower, although their switches use a different design, of course. Now, naturally, the king of low-friction plastics is PTFE, which has one of the lowest coefficients of friction of any solid, so much so that powdered PTFE is actually used as a lubricant. However, PTFE is a very expensive plastic, so PTFE switches would probably have prohibitive costs to manufacture, never mind the fact that PTFE is relatively weak and possibly wouldn't even be strong enough for such applications. So POM, which is both cheap and very tough, seems like an excellent choice here. In addition, and this is somewhat unclear to me at this time, but the switches are described as self-lubricating, and in fact I've been told that the plastic composition of the POM includes 20% lubricant. Now, I don't know if this means it's got powdered Teflon in them or something, and Mike understandably didn't want to go into too much detail to protect the design of the switches, but suffice to say they added some spice to the pot apparently. Now, I've uttered many criticisms of cherry switches over time, and let me sum them up for you in a nutshell. In my opinion, cherry linears are scratchy and badly weighted, cherry tactiles aren't tactile, and cherry clickies make a horrendous clicky noise. Now, this POM modification certainly does seem to tackle the first issue, that of smoothness, a good ways. Compared to MX Red and MX Black, the difference is immediately noticeable. There's really no competition there, but obviously I'm not going to let it get away that easily. So I decided to give it no quarter, and I pitched it against some really tough competitors, the ones that wipe the floor with conventional switches. I compared them to Fujitsu leaf springs, optoelectric switches such as Bloody Lightstrike and Adomax FlareTech, and Microswitch and Ace Patek Hall Effect. These are collectively the smoothest switches in existence that I know of. And my conclusion was that they feel slightly different, but overall speaking, the creams are basically on the same level as most of these. There is a little bit more friction in the creams than in the other switches, which makes sense as these are all essentially contactless designs, but the friction that is present feels slicker and less scratchy than the little bit of friction that is present in the contactless ones. So in other words, they feel like lubed switches, whereas the contactless switches are inherently smooth, but the end result is much the same. The creams are definitely on the same level of smoothness. The only one that's still a clear winner are the FlareTech switches in the Wooting. Those are still the smoothest switches I know. Interestingly, and possibly inadvertently even, the cream switches also addressed my second problem with Cherry MX linears, namely the bad weighting. I like the light weighting of Cherry MX Red, but it's too easy to accidentally actuate in my opinion, and MX Black just tire out my hands after a while. They're slightly too stiff. Now, these cream ones are kind of in between the two. They actuate at 55 grams, stiffer than the 45 grams of MX Red, but lighter than the 60 grams of MX Black, and they bottom out at 70 grams, right between the 60 grams of MX Red and 80 grams of MX Black. So they make a really nice compromise. They still feel light and responsive, but not so light that they actuate just by glaring at them. I'd say overall they're not exactly in the middle of the two. They feel a little bit closer to MX Black than to MX Red, but the weighting is definitely superior to either in my opinion. Now, one other thing I wanted to test is the sound. How does this sound compare to that of Cherry MX switches? Well, here I put in a Cherry MX black switch, and below that I put in an MX blue stem into a cream switch to compare. And from the tests, it's pretty obvious that the POM creams do sound noticeably lower pitched than the nylon MX switches. Check this out. It's also pretty obvious with the clickies, even counting just the clicker noise, so no bottoming out. The pitch on the cream one is lower than that of the MX one, even though I'm using exactly the same slider. It's just the housing that's different. Although I guess that if you use clicky MX type switches, chances are that a good typing sound isn't one of the things you're looking for anyway. So, to sum it up, these are a very smooth linear switch with a nice intermediate weighting between MX red and black, plus the sound is bassier. It's a win-win situation, I'd say. That's it for this review. Thank you for watching, I hope you enjoyed it, and following is a typing demonstration of me typing on this keyboard.